I spent the whole month getting ready for Christmas. Not because I expected anything grand, but because some part of me still believed he might come. It had been quiet around here for years, ever since his father passed, and even quieter during holidays. But this year, I needed something to feel alive again. I took out the red tablecloth I'd kept folded in the back of the drawer, the one with tiny gold threads that shimmer a little under warm light. I wiped down the chairs, polished the forks and spoons, and went to the market to buy everything he used to like: fresh potatoes, dried fruits, a small bottle of apple cider, even the ingredients for that sweet rice dish he always asked for as a kid. It was exhausting, but it felt good to have something to care for, to plan, to hope. I cooked through the night, one thing at a time, tasting carefully, checking the old recipe book I barely needed. The smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen like it used to. For a few hours, I felt like the past was still close enough to touch. By morning, I had set the table for two. Not because someone was definitely coming, but because not doing it would mean giving up completely. I lit a small candle near the centerpiece, not too bright, just enough to keep the silence from swallowing the room. And then I sat, waiting. At noon, I sent a message. "Are you on your way, sweetheart?" He saw it almost instantly, but didn't reply. I told myself maybe he was driving, maybe he'd surprise me. Maybe he was already nearby, holding flowers or smiling like he used to when he walked through the door. But time passed, and nothing. It was around 2 in the afternoon when the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. I rushed to the door, smoothing my sweater, checking my hair in the hallway mirror like it mattered. When I opened it, 2 young delivery men stood there, one holding a thermal bag and the other checking a receipt. "Delivery for Ms. Helen?" I froze for a moment before nodding, then signed the slip with hands that suddenly felt heavy. They smiled politely, wished me a Merry Christmas, and walked away. Inside the bag was a takeout meal. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes. Nothing wrong with it, just not mine. Just food. There was a note printed on the receipt. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Hope your day is amazing. Love, Gabriel." I stood there for a long time, holding the plastic container in one hand, staring at the table I had spent hours preparing. My food was still warm on the stove. His plate was waiting, spotless, untouched. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. The television played one of those cheerful specials in the background, but I couldn't stand the sound of laughter that didn't belong to anyone in this house. I turned it down until it was barely a whisper. I sat down again, staring at the meal he sent, then at the one I had made. I didn't eat either. Later that evening, I went to my room, still wearing the same clothes, still waiting for something that never came. I lay in bed without turning off the lights, holding a pillow like it could fill the space he used to. But it didn't. I've never been the kind of mother who expected gifts or grand gestures. All I ever wanted was his presence, just one real moment, one look, one voice saying, "Hey, Mom, I'm here." Maybe he thought sending food was enough. Maybe he was trying in his own way. But as I sat there, alone at a table for two, I realized something I didn't want to admit out loud. I'm no longer his home. I'm just a delivery address. And if you've ever felt like that, like someone forgot how much you love them, then maybe you understand. Leave a comment below if you've ever had a quiet holiday like this one. Because sometimes, being seen by a stranger is the only warmth we get. I didn't have the heart to clear the table that night. Even as the candles burned low and the food on the stove grew cold, I left everything just as it was. Part of me hoped that if I kept the setting untouched, maybe something would change. Maybe the door would open after all. Maybe he'd realize how much it mattered, even if too late. But morning came, and nothing had changed. I walked into the kitchen and looked at that red tablecloth I'd chosen with such care. The golden threads didn't shine quite the same. The chair where I imagined him sitting now looked painfully empty. Not just physically, but in spirit. It didn't carry his shape, his presence, his voice. It was just wood now. I finally covered the dishes, though I didn't eat any of it. I put the rice in containers, the roasted vegetables into foil, and carefully folded the tablecloth, as if folding it would somehow fold away the disappointment too. Later that day, I sat on the living room floor with an old box of memories I hadn't touched in years. It held little things, his drawings from school, birthday cards he made with crayons, a paper ornament he crafted in 2nd grade that said, "My mom makes Christmas magic." I held that wrinkled paper in my hands for a long time. Longer than I care to admit. That little boy, the one who believed I could make anything special, where did he go? I know people grow. I know life moves fast, and responsibilities pile up. But how do you forget someone who once knew every corner of your room, someone who stayed up sick with you, cooked for you, protected you? The silence in the house felt heavier after the holiday. It wasn't just loneliness. It was that dull ache of being left behind, not in a dramatic way, not with cruelty, but with something colder, neglect that's wrapped in politeness. That evening, the doorbell rang again. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I opened the door cautiously. There was a small package on the mat. No return address, just my name written neatly in black marker. Inside was a digital photo frame, already programmed and ready to plug in. No card. No message. I set it on the counter and stared at it for a moment before finally plugging it into the wall. The screen lit up slowly. Then one by one, the images began to cycle. A photo of Gabriel as a toddler, sitting in my lap with jam on his face. Us at the beach, building sandcastles. Him holding a birthday cake with too many candles and not enough frosting. And me, always in the background, smiling, laughing, holding him close. Each picture hit me with a kind of quiet violence. So full of warmth, and yet so distant now. They weren't memories anymore. They were ghosts, looped on a screen I hadn't asked for. The last photo caught me off guard. It was Gabriel, standing next to his wife. Her belly round, hands resting gently over it. She was pregnant. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. No phone call. No announcement. No, you're going to be a grandma. Just a silent photo, dropped at the end of a slideshow like punctuation, a full stop where there should have been a beginning. I didn't cry. Not immediately. I just sat down and watched the images loop again and again. And with every cycle, the distance between us felt a little larger. He was starting a new chapter. Building a new family. And I was just a faded memory programmed into a frame. Not invited into the future. Not even asked to witness it. That night, I unplugged the device and placed it in the drawer. Not out of anger. Not even sadness. Just a quiet acceptance that whatever thread still tied him to me was wearing thin. It had been weeks since Christmas, but the quiet hadn't gone away. Not the usual quiet of an empty house. I'd grown used to that. This was different. It was the kind of silence that settles behind your ribs and makes everything feel suspended. I kept checking my phone, even though I knew better. No missed calls. No messages. The last thing he had sent was that photo frame, and since then, nothing. I told myself maybe he was busy. Maybe he was waiting for the new year to calm down. But even lies meant to protect you start to hurt if you repeat them too often. One morning, while folding laundry, I thought about calling him. Not to say anything heavy, just to ask how he was doing, if he was excited, how his wife was feeling with the baby coming. But I didn't. Because deep down, I was afraid of what the silence would sound like, if he didn't pick up. So instead, I did what mothers learn to do when no one's looking. I worried in silence. I made soup I didn't eat, cleaned drawers I didn't need to open, watched shows I'd seen a dozen times. The routine helped, a little. But some nights, when the lights were off and the house made those tiny creaks and sighs, it hit me harder. I'd sit by the window with a cup of lukewarm tea, watching the dark street outside, wondering what time he went to bed. If he ever thought about me while brushing his teeth. Or if I had already become one of those memories that fade into the background, like wallpaper in a house you barely notice anymore. A few days later, the phone rang unexpectedly. I rushed to grab it. My hand shook when I saw his name on the screen. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and answered. "Hi, Mom." His voice was calm. Kind. Like nothing was wrong. We talked. Not for long. He told me work was hectic, they were going to doctor's appointments every week, the nursery was almost done. He sounded happy. And I was happy for him. Truly. But something in the way he spoke, cheerful, efficient, like checking something off a list, made my chest tighten. He asked if I'd received the frame, said he hoped I liked it. I told him I did. I didn't mention the picture at the end. Didn't ask why he hadn't told me himself. Didn't bring up Christmas. I didn't want to ruin the only bridge still standing between us. Before hanging up, he said. "We should catch up soon. I'll call you next week." I said. "I'd like that." And then the call ended, and the silence returned. But now it felt different, heavier. Because now I had heard his voice. Now I knew he was out there, moving forward, living his life. And somehow, I wasn't part of it. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about what it meant to be a mother when your child no longer needs your presence, only your memory. Maybe this is just how it goes. Maybe it's not about anyone being wrong, just life shifting around you, while you stay still. I looked around the living room, the same pictures on the shelves, the same worn couch, the same quiet clock ticking by. And I realized that nothing around me had changed. But somehow, I had. And that change didn't make noise. It came slowly, in pauses, in waiting. In the silence after the ring. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. And the promised call never came. I tried to act like I hadn't been waiting for it. I kept busy, dusted shelves I had cleaned the day before, watered plants that didn't need it, rewound old tapes just to hear voices that no longer called me. The kind of things you do when your hands need a distraction, but your heart won't sit still. I told myself not to take it personally. People forget. People get overwhelmed. But it's strange, isn't it? How easily we explain away the pain others cause us, just to avoid the sting of admitting we weren't important enough to remember. One afternoon, while organizing a drawer full of papers I hadn't touched in years, I found a small envelope with his handwriting. It was from when he went to college, his first week away. Inside was a short note that read, "Miss you already, Mom. Can't wait to come home. Love you." I stared at it for so long the words started to blur. It wasn't the note itself that broke me, it was the reminder that once upon a time, I had been someone he couldn't wait to return to. Now I wasn't even someone he remembered to call back. I considered calling him myself. Several times, in fact. I even picked up the phone and dialed halfway through. But then I'd hear his voice in my head, cheerful and polite, and I'd remember how small I had felt after the last call. Not because he was unkind, he wasn't. But because the space between us was so large and growing. I began to write a letter. Not one I intended to send, just words that needed to live somewhere outside my chest. I wrote about Christmas, about the meal I'd made, about the silence that came with the delivery bag. I wrote about the photos in the frame, and how it hurt to find out about the baby that way. I wrote about how proud I was of him. How deeply I missed him. And how I wondered if maybe I was no longer part of the story he was writing. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in a book I used to read to him at bedtime, a collection of old stories about dragons and knights and impossible adventures. Back when he believed I could keep the world safe just by being in the room. Now, the world was bigger. And I was smaller in it. I didn't cry that night. There are some aches that don't ask for tears. They just settle quietly into your bones, like winter air in old houses. I lay in bed thinking of things I never said. Things like, I miss you. I still wait for you. I wish I mattered more. But I didn't say them. Because sometimes, silence feels safer than rejection. And because I wasn't sure if he'd know what to do with that kind of truth. The day the baby was born, I didn't know. I found out 2 weeks later, from a post someone else shared. A picture of Gabriel holding the newborn, eyes shining, smile wide, captioned with hearts and joy and hashtags I didn't understand. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not with jealousy. Not even bitterness. Just a kind of soft ache. Like watching a sunrise from behind a locked window. They looked so happy. And I was happy for them, truly. But I also couldn't help but notice that I wasn't mentioned. Not even a simple line, "Grandma's excited too." Because the truth is, he doesn't know that I cried that night, alone in the kitchen, sitting on the stool he used to climb when he wanted to help me cook. He doesn't know I whispered welcome to the world to a baby I've never met. He doesn't know I folded and refolded the little sweater I bought months ago, just in case I got invited. He doesn't know how many versions of a message I typed and erased, never sent, afraid I'd sound like I was begging for a place in a life that's no longer mine. The days passed. The silence stretched. And I began to realize something. Maybe he hadn't pushed me away. Maybe he had simply moved forward and forgotten to look back. That's the part that stings the most, not anger, not even disappointment. Just absence. A quiet erasure. Not deliberate. Just complete. I still keep the frame, though I haven't plugged it in again. It sits on the shelf, right next to an old photo of us from a Christmas long ago. He must have been 8 or 9, cheeks red, smiling with frosting on his nose. Back when he used to say I made the holidays magical. Back when he still believed I'd always be part of the picture. Now, I stay in the background. And that's okay. Love doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes it's just the quiet promise to keep caring. Even when no one notices. Still, I wish he knew how much I loved him. Not in the way that says it with words. But in the way that stays up late for a phone call that never comes. That cooks too much food for an empty chair. That folds a sweater for a baby who doesn't know your name. He'll never know all the things I held back to protect him from guilt. All the times I said I'm fine when I wasn't. All the tears I dried quietly so he could keep believing I was strong. But maybe that's the kind of love mothers carry. The kind you don't see. The kind you only understand when it's gone. And if you've ever been through something like this. If you've ever waited in silence, hoping to be remembered. Then you understand. Leave a comment below and tell me your story. Sometimes, it helps to know we're not the only ones sitting quietly. Loving loudly. And holding space for someone who doesn't look back.